Whenever we see a player's ADP start to rise, it's always a good idea to take a step back and try to determine whether or not it's actually a good idea to invest at that draft capital. Maybe we shouldn't be jumping into the deep end with everybody else. Just like our mother used to tell us, right? If we looked at her and said, well, everybody's doing it, she would say to us, if so-and-so jumped off a bridge, would you jump along with them? You know, in fantasy football, sometimes it's a good idea to let our league mates jump while we stand back and just laugh at them for being fools. Headliner Nation, today's video, we've got 3 running backs whose ADP continues to rise from the time last season ended to probably by the time this season begins. And is it a good idea to be investing in these running backs at their current ADP? And why does their ADP continue to rise? Let's dive into it and try to figure out whether or not we should be diving into the deep end on all of these players. But first, Headliner Nation, do not forget our 2025 Fantasy Football Draft Guide is already open and available for purchase. Head on to the link in the description below this video, tfhdraftguide.com, and order yours right now. You are going to get access to it right away with tons of information for you to start preparing for your drafts right now. But what you currently see in the draft guide is not all you're getting. There is a ton of information to come. Probably 100+ player profiles. There's going to be the dynamic running back rating, the perfect draft, and so much more to help you get ready for football this fall. So get ahead of your competition. If your league mates know about our channel and are buying our draft guide, you better get yours first so you can beat them to the punchline. Let's go ahead and talk about Christian McCaffrey to begin. I'm a little shocked to see where his ADP currently lands him. Right now, he is the RB5 going 10th overall over on Underdog in best ball drafts and across other fantasy platforms as well. It is crazy to think that people are going to buy into Christian McCaffrey once again after another injury-riddled season. But is it worth it? Is it worth the risk knowing that you'll probably have to use your first-round pick on Christian McCaffrey? Well, let's take a little bit of a look back. Obviously, in 2024, he missed time due to the Achilles and the PCL injury. He missed weeks 1 through 8, and he was able to come back from weeks 10 through 13 when he had 50 rushing attempts for 202 rushing yards. He had a 4.0 yards per attempt with 146 receiving yards and no touchdowns. Everybody was glad that Christian McCaffrey was back and was hoping that after shaking off a little bit of rust, he would be ready for a fantasy football playoff run. Except then he missed weeks 14 through 18. But the last time that he missed 9+ games in a season was back in 2021. Now, the year after, in 2022, that was when he was traded from Carolina to the San Francisco 49ers. So clearly San Francisco felt like Christian McCaffrey still had more than enough juice left in the tank to spend what they did to get him. Now the question becomes though, what did he do after his last injury-riddled season? The numbers were really good because after missing 9 games in 2021, he came back in 2022 with 244 rushing attempts, 1,139 rushing yards, 85 receptions, 741 receiving yards, 13 total touchdowns, and in half PPR leagues, finished as the RB2. So the last time that he spent a ton of time on the sideline, the year after, he bounced back and still gave you a top 5 season. Now, he is a little bit older now, and there is more wear and tear on the tires than there were a couple of years ago in 2022 when he had the bounce back campaign. Does he have enough left? San Francisco, I think, is trying to tell us it's a possibility because they decided to trade Jordan Mason to the Minnesota Vikings this offseason instead of spending the money to keep him around. Now, you're already spending a ton of money on Christian McCaffrey, so maybe San Francisco just thought to themselves, we don't need to spend any more on another running back. So they do have 4th rounder from last year, Isaac Guerendo, who performed well at times as the backup to Christian McCaffrey. And then they spent a 5th round pick this year on Jordan James. They didn't really spend any money on free agency to try and hold that position up if Christian McCaffrey were to get hurt. They didn't spend a whole lot of draft capital to try and hold that position up if Christian McCaffrey were to get hurt. And they let their prime backup from last season, who looked great, by the way, when Christian McCaffrey went down, walk away in a trade because they didn't want to have to pay him. So either the San Francisco 49ers thinks Isaac Guerendo can absolutely be a top, I would say, 20 running back in the NFL, or they believe Christian McCaffrey is going to be just fine. But what do you believe? Because it's your fantasy team that you're going to have to worry about. Can you risk spending a 1st round pick on Christian McCaffrey again, only to get very little value out of him? Because if you draft Christian McCaffrey, you almost certainly have to back him up with Isaac Guerendo, who's going to be going later on in drafts. But it really seems odd to me that Christian McCaffrey has now jumped not only into the 1st round, but a guy that is going anywhere from picks 5 to picks 10. That's a lot of draft capital, and you're giving up some really good players behind him to go with somebody who over the past several years has shown you he's not nearly as reliable as we would like. What about Bucky Irving? He is solidifying himself as being a top 10 running back pick and is now getting into the 2nd round, and we'll probably see that start to rise. Now, we are using accumulation of best ball ADP and ADP for some other websites as well. Some things will change by the time the season gets here, and one thing that we see a big change in is the ADP of running backs, because over on Underdog, a lot of people live by the fact that they have to draft a wide receiver early, because you can start 3 wide receivers. You could also start 3 running backs as well, 2 running back spots and a flex spot. But sometimes you get way better value on running backs on Underdog than really what you should. So when you start drafting on Yahoo, ESPN, CBS, Sleeper, wherever it may be, once that starts to happen for redraft leagues, I expect Bucky Irving to continue to climb and not just be a guy that's being drafted towards the end of the 2nd round, but a guy that potentially is being looked at as a fringe round 1 draft pick. I would not be shocked if his ADP does not put him in the early 2nd round and potentially into the late 1st round. If it gets that high, should you be investing? This one may be a better idea. And I want to know from the nation down below, if you had your choice, doesn't matter ADP or anything like that, would you rather have Christian McCaffrey or would you rather have Bucky Irving in 2025? Because I would be willing to bet if we factored in ADP and I said to you, you could get Bucky Irving at the end of the 2nd as your RB1, or you would have to take Christian McCaffrey at the end of the 1st as your RB1. I guarantee that 90% of the people out there would say Bucky Irving at the end of the 2nd. So let's just toss ADPs out the window. It doesn't matter where you would have them or where you would draft them. Who do you think has a better season in 2025? Christian McCaffrey or Bucky Irving? Now, Bucky Irving was really good last season, but I don't think people really remember how slow his season started. Rachaad White was the guy, not only to begin the season, but he was still a thorn in the backsides of all Bucky Irving owners for a majority of the year as well. To begin the season, Bucky Irving in weeks 1 through 9, his average per game was 9.2 attempts, 46.6 rushing yards, 2.6 receptions, 19.3 receiving yards, and 0.3 total touchdowns per game. That put him from weeks 1 through 9 overall is the RB27. Maybe a running back that you could flex, but you probably weren't playing all that often. But weeks 10 through 18 is where things really went wild. Weeks 10 through 18, his average per game jumped from 9.2 to 15.5. He averaged over 20 more rushing yards per game. That jumped to 87.9. Receptions about the same at 3. Receiving yards a little bit higher at 27.3. And total touchdowns right around the same area at 0.6. That was enough to push him all the way up to the RB7 from weeks 10 through 18. But I just mentioned Rachaad White just a second ago. And if you've been a viewer, subscriber, member of this channel for a while now, whatever it may be, you've probably seen me get pretty animated on screen about how much I loathe Rachaad White. The arguments for Rachaad White from all the truthers out there just never seem to make a ton of sense to me. And I always would push back on some of those arguments. And heading into 2024, Rachaad White was one of our biggest busts of the offseason. And we nailed it. But I still do not love the fact that Rachaad White had double-digit carries in 10 of 16 games in 2024, 5 of which came from weeks 10 through 18. Now, Rachaad White still continued to get too many touches when Bucky Irving clearly was a much better back. And if we were heading into 2025 under the impression that Rachaad White was still going to get double-digit carries, I would be worried about Bucky Irving and his ceiling. However, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers tried to redeem themselves at the end of the year because Rachaad White in week 16, 17, 18, and the wild card round combined between those 4 games, 10 attempts, 54 rush yards, 9 receptions, 55 receiving yards, and 0 touchdowns. Finally, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers decided to themselves, we don't need to give Rachaad White nearly as many carries as he was getting. Rachaad White's still going to get some work in the passing game. Bucky Irving is really not going to see his volume there tick up an awful lot. But this offseason, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did not add any significant depth to the running back position. They didn't draft anyone of significance. They didn't sign anyone of significance. In fact, they decided to add more wide receivers, drafting Emeka Egbuka in the first round of the draft. And don't forget, Chris Godwin will be back from injury at some point in 2025. Plenty of weapons around him. A quarterback that has shown to be more than competent of running this offense there, and an offensive line that he can still run behind and be fairly effective. Take the double digits away from Rachaad White. That man should not be getting any more than 9 touches in a game. And Bucky Irving's ceiling is probably a top 7 running back. If Rachaad White continues to get too many carries, that's where he's going to have trouble maybe reaching his ceiling every single week. But the trend at the end of the season, maybe that continues. Last but not least, maybe the biggest running back winner of the entire offseason, Cincinnati's Chase Brown, one of our breakout candidates from last season, is now going to have an ADP that's going to cost way more than what you invested last year. As of right now, the RB11 being drafted 27th overall. A 3rd round pick that would likely be your RB2, or if for some reason you go wide receiver heavy to start, would be your RB1. Now, would you invest in him as your RB1? Would you invest in him as your RB2? Do you hope that his ADP pushes him back closer to the 4th round, and then maybe you go running back heavy to start? That's where the question is going to become, is Chase Brown a good value in 2025 based on his ADP continuing to rise? And this was a guy all off season long. When we got to free agency, people said, oh, Cincinnati's going to sign somebody. When we got to the draft, people said, oh, Cincinnati's going to draft somebody. And really the only person that they added of, I guess any value is they brought back Samaje Perine, which may not even hurt Chase Brown all that much. The thing that may hurt Chase Brown is the fact that Cincinnati's defense might suck this year. Last season for Chase Brown started a little bit slower as well, but he definitely picked up way quicker in the season than what Bucky Irving did, because from weeks 1 through 3 last year, he only averaged 4.6 attempts per game. But then the rest of the way, weeks 4 through 18, he had double-digit carries in every single game the rest of the way. The backfield was turned over to him pretty quickly last season, and he was good the rest of the way. But I just mentioned it. Cincinnati's defense might be terrible this season. So is there any trends from last year that we need to be keeping an eye on? So I went and I dove into it a little bit. And first I wanted to see, what did the statistics look like in wins and losses last year for Chase Brown? So in wins last season, 8 games. Losses last season, 8 games. Perfect split. In wins last season, 144 attempts, 610 rushing yards, a 4.24 yards per attempt, 31 targets, 27 receptions, 192 receiving yards, 7 total touchdowns. What did it look like in losses? In those 8 games, 85 attempts, 380 rushing yards, a 4.47 yards per attempt, 34 targets, 27 receptions, 168 receiving yards, and 4 total touchdowns. Running the ball more in losses, you're typically not going to see, right? If a team loses a game, normally the running back is going to run the ball less. So when you look at these numbers right off the bat, it doesn't make you feel great, because if Cincinnati's defense is not going to be all that good this season, you have to wonder whether or not Chase Brown is going to be able to give you RB1 value. Because if he's going as the RB11 and you're drafting him as such, you're going to want RB1 type of upside. But I was thinking to myself, you know what? I think it depends more on what was happening when teams were winning, tied, and losing. So not necessarily all the stats at the end of the game, but the stats in the period in which the score was one way or another. So I dove into it further. Let's take a look at the stats when the Cincinnati Bengals were winning games. When Cincinnati was winning, leading during a game last season, Chase Brown had 101 attempts, 410 rushing yards. He averaged 4.1 yards per attempt, 21 targets, 19 receptions, 100 receiving yards, and 4 total touchdowns. Now, when the game was tied, he had 58 rushing attempts, 269 rushing yards for a 4.6 yards per attempt, 21 targets, 14 receptions, 70 receiving yards, and 3 total touchdowns. Now here comes the big part. What did Chase Brown do while Cincinnati was losing last year? 70 rushing attempts. So overall, when Cincinnati was losing games last season, he saw 31 less rushing attempts. He ran for 301 rushing yards, which was actually a better yards per attempt when Cincinnati was losing than when they were winning. Now, why could that possibly be? Well, maybe teams, when Cincinnati were winning, they just were going to stack the box a little bit more. Maybe when they were losing and teams were trying to defend against the run or the pass a little bit better, you've got Jamar Chase, you've got T. Higgins, you've got Mike Gesicki. Those are a lot of weapons that you have to try and keep an eye on. And if you're devoting a ton of resources to them, it's going to open up more running space. So even though he wasn't getting nearly as many as attempts, he was way more efficient running when behind last season. Targets were about the same, 23. Receptions were about the same, 21. Except that he had 190 receiving yards when losing last season, and also 4 total touchdowns. So when you break it down that way and you take a look at it, maybe the statistics when Cincinnati is losing games, we're not losing a ton of value. Maybe he's not going to be an RB1 during that time frame. Maybe he's going to be an RB2. So when you're drafting this season, if you think to yourself, Chase Brown is a target of mine, I absolutely love him, I want him on my squad, maybe you should be drafting him as your RB2. If you want to go wide receiver, or wide receiver tight end to start your draft, Chase Brown in the 3rd round is probably not going to be a good value. Now, let me give you the best case scenario. Bonus time. Taylor, sound the horn. Let's go into overtime for this video. I didn't even put anything in the notes. I'm just going to talk about it right off the cuff right now. Here's the thing, okay? If Chase Brown, best case scenario, falls into the 4th round, that's where we want to take him. Because at that point, one of two things can happen for your team that I love way more. Number one, let's say we're going balanced to start and Chase Brown falls into the 4th round. Then we have a combination of wide receiver, running back heading into the 4th. So you can draft Chase Brown as your RB2, and you've got some high upside wide receivers that you've already drafted to maybe help offset some of that upside that Chase Brown may not have if Cincinnati is losing. But here's another great scenario. Maybe you don't give a crap about wide receivers. Maybe you love some running backs like your boy does, okay? Maybe in the first 4 rounds, we decide to go with 3 running backs and 1 wide receiver. Now, if you don't like that draft strategy, I don't care. Not the time to argue about it. We'll do that this entire offseason. I'm just talking in speculation right now. If you want to draft 3 running backs and 1 wide receiver in your first 4 rounds, and Chase Brown could be your RB3 in round 4, boom, lock it in. That's where I would love Chase Brown as my RB3 flex option in the 4th round. I've got 2 high-end running backs. I've got a good wide receiver. Chase Brown falling to the 4th round would be the best case scenario for fantasy football drafts this offseason. That does it for overtime. That does it for this episode of the Fantasy Headliners. Headliner Nation, stay safe and stay healthy out there. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button if you did. Hit the subscribe button if you're new here. Turn on the bell notifications. And it's almost time to start hitting that join button down below and becoming a member of the channel once again, where you get one-on-one interaction and advice right from Jake and myself. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.